Hi everyone, this is Tim from the Positively Charged podcast. I hope you're all well. In this second episode of the show, I'm going to talk about emotions, what they are, the purpose they serve, and practical ways of how to change how you feel. We've all had times in our lives where we felt emotional pain, and if our own life experiences, lessons learned, and understanding that we've gained can be used to help anyone else from either hitting that proverbial bump in the road in life's journey or to alleviate someone else's pain and suffering, then it's in the spirit of that I've researched and recorded this podcast. So just quickly before we dive in, there's a few things I want to say. First of all, these are purely my own views and the views of other people whose work I respect. I'm not a doctor, a shrink, or an astronaut for that matter. And this is just a dialogue between me and you, and for information and hopefully entertainment purposes. Also, because this is a big subject, there's a lot of information in here. I really wanted to give you all of the hands-on strategies to feel better should you find yourself in some emotional pain. And all of the things I'm going to talk about I've actually used myself and have found great personal benefit from. So I wanted all of these as a reference audio for you, something that you could come back to, listen to on a few different occasions and get something from. Consequently, this podcast is what I will call content rich. It has nutrition and substance for your mind, body and spirit. So if you're after the equivalent of fast food, then I suggest taking this information in several small bites. But for the people who are hungry, let's begin. For you to get the most out of the information in this podcast, here's a few pointers to help you. When we want to move forward and progress in life, in my opinion, it helps to have a balance of the following things. A desire to learn new things, of course, balanced with a willingness to get rid of the things we already know or feel that are destructive and hold us back. So within any energy, for example, within electricity, there's also the study of resistance. What's stopping the maximum flow? It's the same thing with learning and understanding. So when we remove any of the blockages or limiting beliefs or misinformation that's holding us back, then we enable ourselves to learn and grow more efficiently. On this podcast, there's a good chance that you're going to hear some ideas and information that's new to you. Think them over for yourself and entertain the idea that just because they're outside the norm of what you're used to, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong or don't work. Progress is made often outside of our comfort zone. When we suspend our judgment and being dismissive of new information, we increase the chance of not missing out on new information that we may have previously disregarded. So in here, there's a variety of different types of information and strategies that you can use to help you right now. And my advice is that if there's some idea that doesn't resonate with you, that you don't connect with, that's okay. I'll make the analogy of it's like waiting for a bus at a bus stop. So just let that one drive past you, and hopefully there'll be another idea along soon. Another thing that people can fall victim to is to dismiss an idea because of its simplicity. But sometimes the most simple and direct action is the most powerful. For example, just taking the splinter out and letting nature do its job of natural healing. Just because you already know a piece of knowledge, you may end up rejecting it. When people hear an idea again that they have already heard, they can dismiss it because they think that the key to better understanding is to accumulate more and more bits of knowledge, like they will somehow all unite together and sort your problems out for you. If you reject an idea as you hear it, you've also stopped yourself taking action on what the content of the idea could hold. So awareness and education is vital, but remember, it's taking action on that knowledge that is the real benefit. Also, hearing the same piece of information at different times in our lives has different meaning to us. Maybe we're just in the right mood that day to hear that piece of information, for it to resonate deeper within us, so we feel it more and are more likely to take action upon it and use it. So let's have a look at what emotions are. Everything that you do is driven by your emotions. You either take action to achieve outcomes you want, or to avoid ones that you don't want. For most of the time, we're relatively unconscious of this. The quality of our life is probably more about our emotional quality of life than any other single factor. Our emotions can be seen as our internal guidance system, a feedback to us through our senses of the emotional energy level that we're experiencing, influenced by the type of thoughts that we're thinking. On an energy level, positively charged emotions are higher in vibration, and negative emotions are slower. Positive emotions are signals that we're thinking in line with our true limitless nature, whereas negative emotions tell us that we're perceiving a situation from a place of disempowerment and other low-level emotions. Our true nature is limitless in potential, and when we think in terms of lack, limitation, and powerlessness, we will inevitably feel the resistance to that. We're conditioned to think that struggle is the way to be strong, but with emotions, the struggle that we feel is like the one from swimming upstream in a river against the current, or that of a fly trapped inside a spider's web. As it's in the wrong direction, the more effort we put in, the more we struggle. So there are two general types of emotions. Those that feel good, the ones that we like and want more of, which we refer to as positive emotions, and those that feel bad, painful, the ones that we don't want, we don't like, and we want less of, which we refer to as negative emotions. To really understand the power that can be involved in our emotions, think for a moment of our instincts. The two main instincts that we're born with are those of self-preservation and of procreation. These ensure our immediate and long-term survival. So we have emotional responses hardwired into these instincts. I call these emotions primal emotions. So the hardwired emotional response with procreation is pleasure, or positive emotion, and the hardwired response to our survival being threatened is fear, or negative emotion. To get real insight into our feelings, let's look at the nature of us and how we relate to the world. So the scientific definition of an organism being alive is that it must act upon its environment, and the environment must respond. It must act back. It's that exchange of energy and interaction that scientifically defines life itself. So if life is an interaction, then the more we act, take action, create movement, the more alive we feel. Motion truly does create emotion. So what governs our actions? One of the things that hugely impacts our actions are our decisions, which are as a result of our feelings created by our thoughts. Decision-making is only possible in the present moment. We can make decisions about the past and the future, but those decisions are made in the here and now. So consequently, the only place we have any power to make the decisions that lead to the action that makes us feel more alive is in the present moment. There's the old saying, it's called the present because it's a gift. The practical thing to take away from this is be aware of where your focus is. Of course, it's okay to look back to the past, to remember a nostalgic moment, or to compare a past situation to a present one, to learn from the past. Just as it's okay to look to the future, to plan, to set goals, to prepare for future appointments, organise future events and so on. But that's just visiting those places. It's not living there. It's not being focused there. Being in the present, we can feel emotions more vividly, more vibrantly. How many times have we worried about a future event or dwelled with regret or guilt about some event in the past? If this behaviour worked in helping us at all, at least there'd be a positive outcome. But as we know from experience, it doesn't help, and the outcome is emotional pain. When we're not focused in the present moment, we feel helpless, and understandably so, because we're dealing with situations that we have zero control over. And because the subconscious deals with emotions and not things like time, that's purely a man-made idea, the emotions that we can trigger from repeatedly thinking about past painful memories and future events that we're worried about that haven't even happened yet can cause us a lot of emotional pain. And as we're not in the moment, we have no direct actions that we can take to change those results and change how we feel. And because we're not focused in the present, as a result, it's easy to slip into the lower level emotions that come with that feeling of helplessness, such as despondency and futility, depression and so on. The less action we take, the less alive we feel, and we can only take action in the present. We may live in a modern technological world, but our emotions haven't caught up yet. We don't have the threat to our everyday survival in the forms that we used to. I don't know about you, but I've never had to flee from an oncoming T-Rex, and the chances of that happening are quite slim, unless I go to an island owned by a mad scientist who wants to populate it with genetically modified dinosaurs. But modern life has its own fear-based killer, and we call it stress. The feeling we refer to as stress is based within fear, but instead of there being some imminent physical danger, with stress, it's more of a feeling towards our inability to deal with a situation. Possible causes could be financial concerns, health issues, or an overwhelming situation that we don't feel like we have the inner resources to deal with. And when we're stressed, whereabouts are we focused? We're either usually worried about something in the past or projecting forward to the future, and so a sense of powerlessness to take action and change things is created. The more helpless we feel, the more stressed we feel, and a vicious cycle is created as we can spiral down into the lower emotions and further away from those positive emotions that we crave. We only have to look at the statistics for causes of death to see stress-related illnesses are very much a part of our modern world. Dealing with stress or any of those unwanted fear-based emotions is incredibly important. The stress is an interpretation of external events by us, and so it's only us that can deal with it. We can effectively manage stress by making decisions and accepting that we've done the best that we can. We in turn have to create our own self-defense against the pressure from the external environment, from the outside world. And we must also learn how to depressurize to balance out. Otherwise, too much external pressure pushing in on us can lead to depression. Wayne Dyer talks about the effects of external pressure in this way. When you squeeze an orange, what comes out? The obvious answer is orange juice. And the reason why, of course, being that that's what's inside. And so when life squeezes you, as in pressure from the outside, what comes out is what's inside you. An external event doesn't place any feelings within you. It can only trigger off what's inside. There's a quote that I like, which is, "Happiness is an inside job." This is based on the principle that any emotion that we feel isn't created outside of ourself. We create it. It's the interpretation that we make about an event based upon where we're at emotionally in general in our life and at that moment. It's a positive and empowering choice when we stop pointing fingers at people and circumstances outside and begin to take responsibility for our own feelings. It's us that create our emotions, and other people and events can be a trigger for some unresolved emotion that you have. By taking charge of the way that you feel and the way you respond means that you can be proactive and actually do something about it. So we are responsible for our own happiness. And if your happiness is dependent upon something or someone outside of you, then it's a very vulnerable place to be. This isn't to be confused with loving someone or being in love and being incredibly happy and grateful that they're in your life. I'm talking about giving away all of your emotional power to some fleeting, changeable circumstance outside of yourself. It's the proverbial house of cards. So imagine a tank of fuel, like petrol or gasoline. When you have a full tank, you have enough energy to get on successfully with your journey. But whenever we let negativity into our world and let people just take energy from us, it's the equivalent of having holes in that tank, and we're now leaking energy. Every time we make a decision that goes against our core values, it creates another hole. We've sold ourselves short and associated more emotional pain to standing up for ourselves than dealing with the consequences of our energy being depleted. To stop negative events and people from destructively impacting upon us, we need to master what I call the art of emotional self-defense. Our emotional energy is a force, and we should have the equivalent of a force field that we can deploy when necessary and let the positive people and influences enter while protecting ourselves from external negative forces. A strong emotional self-defense is essential when dealing with stopping negativity from entering our world. Prevention is better than cure, and due to how powerful emotions can be, when it's too late and the emotion has already manifested itself in our reality, our emotional health can suffer. We have enough to deal with sorting out the nature of our thoughts and focus our own emotional issues without adding anything else from the outside environment into the mix. A way to maintain a strong emotional self-defense is by refusing to tolerate any toxic emotions and energy vampires in your life. People who have a severe lack of their own emotional energy through their own negativity can soon become dependent on other people for the energy that they're not generating for themselves. And the more they get, the more they want. We can't always influence who we interact with in our daily life, of course, but we can influence whether or not we allow them to steal our energy. When we have a strong level of emotional energy, we have more to give away to others without depleting the reserves for ourselves. When we create holes in our emotional tank by indulging in negative thoughts or behaviour, we're doing not just a disservice to ourselves, we're doing a disservice to other people that we could potentially help. An important question when dealing with emotions to ask ourselves is, who's influencing your thoughts and consequently influencing your emotional state? We can influence our own feelings, and we can be influenced by outside elements too. Internal influence is when we are guided by our personal thoughts, feelings, decisions and actions. This enables us to step into a place of self-empowerment and self-control and creates a strong emotional disposition. External cues or external influence is where the same things are guided either by abstract concepts like luck or other circumstances outside of our self-influence and control. For example, the peer group, media, general inherited social beliefs, environment. The more we allow ourselves to be influenced by these external factors, the more we're living out of someone else's idea for our own life. And whatever your beliefs are in terms of reincarnation, etc., you only get this moment, this life, as the person you are right now, once. How much time each day do you allocate towards maximizing the you that is living your life? When people replace the time they spend gossiping about other people or worrying about what other people think, or any other behaviour based on inconsequential external events that are destructive and beyond our control anyway, we step into a position of more solid ground emotionally. The place where our thoughts, our feelings and our actions are influenced from plays a huge part in our happiness. When we pay attention to our inner life, we can increase the amount that we're guided by intuition rather than external ideas of what is good or not good for you. Because the external world is so bright and vivid and so much more attention-grabbing and stimulating, we can often get caught up in blaming external events for making you feel a certain way. Our relationships and interactions can be transformed when we use emotional awareness and maturity. To have the knowledge that we generate and are responsible for our own feelings is very empowering. So many arguments are fueled by emotions. They start off with accusations and judgmental behaviour based around the ignorance of how our feelings are generated. You made me feel this way, and so on. People are assigning blame to each other, which tends to escalate the intensity of the emotions, and so it goes round. There's a story about a man who comes home from work one night and sees his neighbour in the street crouched down on the floor, looking around under a streetlight. He asks his neighbour what he's up to, and the neighbour replies that he can't find his car keys. Being a good neighbour, the guy offers to help him look for his keys with him. Some time passes by, and there's still no sign of the keys anywhere. So the guy asks his neighbour, where exactly did you lose the keys? To which he replies matter-of-factly, oh, I dropped them inside my house. And confused, the guy asks him, so why are you looking around out here? To which the man replies, it's much brighter out here, and it's dark inside my house, so I decided to look out here. Be aware that your internal world is 100% your responsibility, 100% within your control. Release your need for external approval, and you will be the one in charge of your worth. Make it a goal to discover and feel the self-worth and freedom that comes from this realization. When you find yourself reacting with anger or any other negative emotion to any person or circumstance, remember that you're responding out of emotions created by old hurts, and this can lead to us being emotionally led, acting out of character, and they weren't themselves. Relate to this. Nobody wants to feel like they're being manipulated by other people's expectations or ideas of how you should be behaving, or living up to the seamlessly endless amount of prescribed images and conditioning that we're bombarded with just by the media alone, to buy into the latest thing that will give you the feelings that they want you to believe their product will instill in you. It's false. Let that whole idea go. They're the ones benefiting from reinforcing the idea that the positive emotions are external to you and can be attained by being a good consumer. There are 4 types of quality of levels of experience that we have in our lives. And as life is defined as being an interactive experience, it's obviously important to know what these 4 types of experience are. So class 1 experience is one that feels good to us, it's good for us, it's good for others, and it serves the greater good. This is obviously the most all-round positive, complete and beneficial experience that we can have. A class 2 experience is one that doesn't feel good to us, but it's good for us, it's good for others, and it serves the greater good. It's this type of experience that so many people avoid, as the initial pain deters them, and the irony is that it's this class of experience that can lead to so much positive growth and change. An idea that relates to this, that I suggest that you embrace, is delaying the gratification, as in avoid being motivated by purely short-term, immediate pleasure fixes. Recognize those times in your life when pushing through some discomfort or pain is actually good for you, and do it anyway. This demonstrates a level of emotional maturity and personal self-control. An example of this may be the first few times you go to the gym or start a new physical workout. A certain amount of people will quit before the benefits kick in to avoid that short-term pain or discomfort. Now we come to the tipping point. The first 2 classes of experience dealt with things that were good for us and for others. Now we start to have a class 3 experience. This is one that feels good to us, but in fact is not good for us, it's not good for others, and it doesn't serve the greater good. It's in this one that many destructive behaviours and habits begin, where we live from a place of getting an instant fix, or as it's known, ego gratification, living for the moment instead of in the moment, without a thought towards the long-term consequences to ourselves or anybody else. This is where addiction can begin, which I've heard defined as something that's no good for us that we can't get enough of. And by that definition, we could be talking about many things, from substance abuse to bad relationships to fast food addictions. Of course, the effects of any drug only last as long as the drug is in our system, And sure enough, after it's no longer affecting us, we come back to where we were with a bump. Talking of fast food, there's a certain chain that may have two big golden arches for its logo, which may offer a meal that has connected the word happy to it, which more accurately should be rebranded as a temporary happy feeling followed by huge energy crash due to your system being inundated by artificial chemicals meal. As a brief aside, I find it unbelievable that it's legal for anyone to associate a prescribed emotion to any product within its branding. Anyway, a Class 4 experience. This one is the same as the previous one, but now even the temporary pleasure has gone from the experience, and now there's a real negative emotion and physical cycle that we can be caught up in. In this experience, it feels bad, it is bad for us, it's no good for others, and it doesn't serve the greater good. Within each of those experiences, how it feels to you, is it good for you, relates to the internal world, to you. And the second two factors, is it good for others and does it serve the greater good, are external factors. We can hugely increase the happiness and fulfillment that we get from life by enduring those Class 2 experiences that don't feel good in the moment, a bit like me working on this podcast, but are good for us and everyone else. And in doing so enough times, we can start transforming those experiences into feeling good at the moment, and they can now start to become a Class 1 experience. We need to be very aware that we're entering into a Class 3 experience when it happens, when even though it feels good, we've crossed over to the dark side, as these experiences are no longer good for us or anyone else. A Class 3 experience can so easily in time lead to a Class 4, as the instant gratification starts to get old and fade. An acronym a guy I know uses that describes this kind of thing is SNUPIT, which stands for serves no useful purpose. So if some situation has no useful or positive effect in it, I suggest you say snup it and embrace something better for you. Maybe not. So the subconscious mind remembers every event in every sensory detail that you've ever experienced. Once we know that, it makes sense to be extra vigilant about what experiences in life we subject ourselves to, as what we see, hear, feel, touch and taste is all being recorded at the back of our mind. And all that information is processed through how we felt when we experienced each event, depending on our emotional state at that time. For those of you that are familiar with image editing software, once you apply an effect or a filter onto an image, you're now viewing the image through that filter. It's no longer being seen in an unaffected state. This emotional filtering in turn affects our thoughts regarding situations now. And when we experience something in life, the mind is always looking for past events that it can reference to give us relevant information to help us deal with the present event as well informed as possible. And so the cycle of events goes. We have to break that cycle in order to emotionally grow and develop in life by allowing ourselves to think new thoughts. It's been estimated that the thoughts most people think today, over 80% of them were thoughts that they had the previous day too. Let's look at the types of emotions that there are in order to define them, and with that awareness we can take action to change them. In their best-selling book, Ask and It Is Given, Esther and Jerry Hicks define the emotional guidance scale, a list that defines 22 different levels of emotion and shows them in order, starting with the most positive and sequentially working down through all the different emotions. We can use this scale as a kind of navigation system, like the GPS in a car, to navigate our way from one emotional state to the next highest one up. I want to make people more aware of this as a tool for you to use and to give you an overview of how to use it, so we know the signs to look out for of when we're sliding down the emotional scale. When we know how to read and recognize the first signs of change, it can save us a lot of potential emotional pain. So the first step in being able to change how we feel is to define and honestly acknowledge what we're feeling. This has great value in itself, as when people feel any of the lower emotions, they can be prone to deny how they feel to everyone around them. even themselves, and acceptance is a very positive first step towards taking action. I posted the diagram of the 22 emotions as defined by the Emotional Guidance Scale onto my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/positivelychargedinformation. And if you're able to look at that diagram now, I suggest you pause this podcast quickly and have a look at that list as I'm discussing it for your reference. If you're not in a position to do that, I recommend having a look at that list when you can. But for now, I'll go through the gist of the list for you. As defined on this list, the most positive and high-frequency emotions are joy, appreciation, empowerment, freedom, and love. Sounds good. In fact, as we'll see, all of the positive emotions have empowerment and action within them to varying degrees. The positive emotions all radiate energy outwards, whereas you'll notice when we get to them that the negative ones start to progressively be more inwards focused, with less action involved and varying degrees of disempowerment built into them. Next in the list we have passion, followed by enthusiasm, eagerness and happiness. It's interesting that energy-wise passion is ranked one place higher than happiness. To me it's because passion is more dynamic in nature, it has more action, and so by the earlier definition of life, it makes us feel more alive. Next in the list is positive expectation and belief, followed by optimism, then hopefulness, and then the final positively charged emotion here, contentment. Now, can you feel the intensity of each emotion stepping down as I was reading them? I certainly could. Contentment is so passive and diluted sounding to me, and certainly not much in the way of action happens here, as is demonstrated by the next emotion down in this list, which is boredom. This is a real neutral emotion to me, representing hitting the pause button on your life. It's emotional stagnation, and it's a gateway to the paths of both the positive and negative emotions, depending on whether you start to be more in the present, make more decisions and take action, or a downward spiral towards increasingly disempowering emotions that makes us focus within, feel less present, and have varying degrees of powerlessness. In the list below boredom is pessimism. So the boredom has led us to feeling pessimistic, which leads us to frustration, irritation, impatience. With these emotions, there's a negative intensity that's crept in. These emotions can really start to influence our behaviour, as we actively want some release from them and can find ourselves as a result in all kinds of different situations. When people are already feeling a negative emotion, then other low frequency emotions like guilt can creep in and compound things. If we feel guilt and shame about how we're feeling, then expressing how we feel and asking for or seeking the help that we need becomes more difficult. If we fail to take action, these emotions can lead to overwhelmment, then disappointment, which creates doubt and then worry. We're growing more internal with our focus at this point on the scale, and from worry we start to discharge the increasingly built up negative energy that has not been released due to our lack of action, and we externalize this emotion, pointing the finger of blame at an outside cause. And this, of course, isn't the real cause, and so this behavior doesn't work, and therefore leads to the next emotion down the emotional scale, which is discouragement. After this builds up, so does the negative emotional charge. The next emotion down is anger, and as this intensifies, we move down to revenge. More intensity follows with hatred, stroke rage, moving into jealousy, which progresses to insecurity, guilt, and unworthiness. Finally, the full extent of the lowest emotional energy level is reached with fear and depression. The anger at this point has been internalized and mixed with despair and powerlessness. The most immediately applicable action step that we can take from this is to learn to recognize the transition from contentment to boredom to pessimism. It's the tipping point of the scales. So with boredom, we have two paths. We can step up to contentment or step down to pessimism. So being very aware, even though the feeling of boredom doesn't seem much to concern ourselves with, it's what it can lead to that makes it so worthy of deserving our attention. So choose to see the onset of a negative emotion as a warning sign, your body's feedback signaling that you need to change the nature and the focus of your thoughts. Now, the way that we perceive an event that happens to us is filtered through how we feel in that moment and our past emotions that are brought up, created by and associated with similar events that we've experienced. The brain does this out of a positive intent, and that is to give us some relevant information from which to make an informed choice so we can learn from our past experiences. We become predisposed to feeling certain ways about certain types of events based upon the interpretation we had of similar events in the past and the emotions that we created at that time. There's the phrase perspective, use it or lose it. And our perspective, the meaning that we give to events, is greatly influenced by how we feel and the emotional filters that we're viewing an event through. Expressions like it's a sore point or a bone of contention or pressing someone's buttons all involve triggered emotions being released that haven't been internally dealt with. Just think about how much conflict in our personal lives and in the world in general would be avoided if we free ourselves from the ego and the attachment for the need to be right. How many arguments start off about one subject and spiral to include several different contentious points that are brought up in this ever increasingly emotionally charged situation? And by the end of the argument, people have completely strayed away from the initial point because people can find it hard to relinquish the need for being right. And because emotions involve the release of such strong chemicals like adrenaline and serotonin and dopamine, people can become addicted to creating emotionally charged situations. When we have unresolved emotions regarding certain issues, we become judgmental, and this imposes concepts like right and wrong on situations that sometimes just are. Anything can be potentially understood and forgiven. There's a lot of benefit to understanding and forgiving situations. If the focus is on sending someone positive, loving energy while they're hurting us, it can be very difficult to do. If we focus on doing it for their benefit, we can think, well, why should I send them positive intentions when they're not doing it to me? But when we reframe this and think about doing it for our benefit, it can become easier. The more that we don't forgive and have bad feelings towards someone or some event, the more resistance that we're putting up to being able to access those higher levels of emotion. So ultimately, we're only hurting ourselves. Forgiveness is something that if it's motivated by doing it for yourself, well, at least you're still forgiving. And if you do it for how you will feel, ultimately, long term, it will benefit you. When we hold on to any emotional toxicity, we only pollute our own atmosphere. And when someone makes a judgment, they shut down the ability to understand and lose the chance of experiencing those higher emotions that come with behavior like tolerance and empathy, mindfulness, and learning to love. This behavior creates those feel-good emotions. And how much we feel we need to judge others reflects on the level of our lack of self-acceptance. Our external environment is purely a reflection of our inside world. And as we interact so closely with our environment, just by cause and effect, action and interaction, the inner world and the outer world are directly related. They're two sides of the same coin. They can be looked at as mirrors of each other, and we can learn about one from the other. When we've got a lot of unresolved feelings going on, how can it not show up and influence your immediate interactions, your environment? It impacts the shape and form of our version of reality. And forgiving yourself and other people may involve acknowledging, processing, and releasing painful emotions. But ultimately, it's worth the short-term pain to have the feeling of lightness and freedom from that baggage. You can start to climb up that emotional scale unimpaired without the resistance to your forward motion. And any kind of forgiveness adds to the levels of those higher emotions that you're able to have access to and feel.
Well, I certainly wasn't joking when I said that this was going to be content rich. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in part 2.